Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello and welcome everybody to episode 16. My name is Ben Adelberg, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, joined as always by Emma Strutt in Ballina, Queensland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Ben. How are you going?
Good, thank you. Now, we're really excited to get our flow back and have some guests lined up again. But before we get cracking on, just got a little bit of admin we want to get through. Firstly, the last episode we spoke about a tour that I was doing of New Zealand with a whole bunch of sports nutrition or plant-based sports nutrition workshops. Unfortunately, with the recent outbreak of COVID and lockdown in Auckland, I've decided to postpone, not cancel, but postpone indefinitely. So if you do follow me on social media, just keep a lookout for those on the Fitness Locker page with the new dates that will be coming up. But yeah, have postponed those for now. However, in the realm of nutrition, whole food, plant-based, Emma, you have been invited to take part in a webinar as a panelist. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as many of you know, I'm involved with Doctors for Nutrition, and they will be hosting a webinar series called Food Vitals. Now, this series will take a deep dive into the evidence-based nutrition, and it's going to share some key clinical and practical steps to implementing this kind of diet. So I will be involved in the first webinar of the series. This one is focusing on evidence-based nutrition in healthcare. So the target audience here will mainly be health professionals and students, but it's open to absolutely anyone who's interested. This one's going to be held on the 24th of September. So mark that in your diaries. Head on over to doctorsfornutrition.org if you want to register. But there are currently 3 more webinars planned for the rest of the year, and that's going to include focusing on IBD and the gut microbiome, which will be excellent. We've got some really fantastic speakers lined up for that one. Following that, there's going to be one on cardiovascular disease and then another on nutrition for pregnancy and early years. So it's shaping up to be a really good series, and I'm sure it will be of interest to a lot of our listeners.
Very, very exciting, and from the comfort of your own home, so we don't have to let COVID ruin that party. But what I did remember reading is that it is limited in the sense that the platform that they use to host the webinar can only handle a certain amount of dial-ins, I suppose. Don't know what the number is, but make sure if you are interested to sign up now so you don't miss out. Just a couple of other little things. First, the next one is our first, Lentil Intervention initiative is a sports gear collection that I'm overseeing here in New Zealand. Again, that's been postponed a little bit, just by a few weeks, the actual delivery to the schools. But if you have any gear that you want to contribute, you do need to be in the Auckland, Waikato region. Get in touch, and hopefully we can touch base and graciously accept. Lastly, we mentioned this before, and if you haven't yet, where have you been? We have a new website, thelentilintervention.org. So if you haven't been on there yet, please do go check it out. There's a whole bunch of content that's going to be uploaded. Sign up to our newsletter, and the direct links to the podcast is on there as well with all the show notes. That is that. Emma, we have a fantastic guest waiting for us. Let's go for it.
Yeah, all right. So we're extremely grateful to have Dr. Sam Gartland joining us today. Dr. Gartland is a UK-trained GP, now based in Ballina in New South Wales. And in 2008, he was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Now, at the time, his symptoms were so severe that he actually had to resign from his job as an intensive care doctor. But since then, Sam has achieved a full recovery through specific diet and lifestyle changes, which we'll be delving into today, so I won't give anything away in the intro. But he now advocates for these lifestyle medicine approaches with his patients in general practice. So he is a breath of fresh air. I'm really looking forward to diving into this one. Dr. Sam Gartland, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be on here, and it's just wonderful that this message is getting out there. So thank you for doing this.
Sam, so welcome. And firstly, let's talk a little bit about your background. You're a doctor. Tell us a little bit about your journey into why you decided the medical field was, your choice for growing up.
Yeah. So I grew up in London and had a pretty usual urban childhood in London, and nutrition was really just handed over. The knowledge of nutrition was really what we're all sort of indoctrinated with. That milk's good for your bones, that you need to have meat and veg in your food, and no real sort of challenge to that paradigm of nutrition. Though it's sort of reflecting back, I remember even as I was younger that different foods would affect how I'd feel, but I didn't really sort of have any framework to, or I didn't manage to create a framework to sort of manage that until later on. And the interest in medicine was I was just very interested in nature. I was very interested in the human body, and it was a sort of natural progression. I guess I was interested in science, and that led me to applying for medical school. And it was really interesting. But as I'm sure we'll go into, and I know many people will be aware that when we go and study medicine and we study or how we're taught nutrition there, it's just a very simplistic teaching around molecules and how they're broken down without any real development of the understanding of how the things that we put into our body on a day-to-day basis actively affect it, or equally how, if we do end up with an illness or a disease, how the things that we put into our body affect it and can change the outcome of what's going on. Yeah.
So, so you studied in the UK. What brought you out to Australia?
Yeah, well, there are a few things that happened. I always had a sense when I was younger that I felt better with more sunlight. I felt it innately.
I can relate. Yep.
And so sort of now with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that was just being in tune with my body. But I didn't have the capacity to think of there's a very direct effect here that the sun. You need the sun shining on your body. You need it on your skin for your body to function normally. So the few things were, I came out to Australia as a medical student as part of an elective. I came to Sydney to do emergency, and a few things struck me. The first was just the joy of being outdoors and by nature here. I guess it's not so enticing to go out when it's howling winds and grey weather like it would be in England. So I was struck by that. On a professional basis, I was very impressed by the Australian emergency doctors. I thought they were exceptionally well trained, and they were very pragmatic in how they approached things. So to me, it's no surprise that the answer to the issue with MS was dealt with so well by a professor of emergency medicine from Australia. To me, they always took a very pragmatic approach. They'd do what works. They were sensible in how they approached things. They just broke it down into what they understood were the problems and moved forward from there. And so I'd been on the elective and came back to the UK and finished my medical degree and did some early intern jobs and then knew I was sort of attracted back to Australia, back to emergency, back in Sydney. But I was doing a lot of shift work, and which is just part of the course with your training. And but I was struggling, and I was very interested in what I was doing. I couldn't, that was the specialty I thought I wanted to go into, but I just struggled. I was getting tired. I felt hugely fatigued. But of course, if I'd gone and spoken, I spoke informally to doctors who I knew. I was in my 20s. I should have had a lot of energy. But I felt absolutely fatigued. But even if I'd consulted with a doctor formally, they wouldn't have been able to understand or explain to me what was going on. Maybe I should have looked elsewhere for advice, but you sort of expect that the best advice is from people who get the formal sort of letters after their names. So in the sort of sense of sort of self-preservation, I guess at the time, I was like, well, I don't think I can handle doing these shift patterns anymore. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to change how I'm living, and I just get out of the shift patterns. I came back to the UK to work in general practice, where I thought I'd have a sort of more stable work pattern. But I wasn't enjoying the work so much. And again, and I've seen it with many doctors, that because we're faced every day with the consequences of Western lifestyle diseases, if you're not going to manage these conditions by dealing with the aspects that have led to the disease state, so the poor nutrition, the stress, the other factors that go into it, you're just not really going to get very far. It can be quite a demoralising process to just throw more and more medications at a problem without actually making someone feel any better. It's not an enjoyable experience for the treating doctor, and it's certainly not an enjoyable experience for the person who's coming for the advice, as far as I can see. So I was like, oh, yeah, I don't fancy this anymore. And I went back into hospital medicine to work in intensive care and anaesthetics, and again back into the shift work, working in the north of England. So not eating a particularly unhealthy diet. I'd cook at home, but naively putting in animal products, dairy, which has got a very strong link with MS, and we can talk about that link a bit later. The issue with meat, all the sort of staples of a typical British diet, that combined with a lack of vitamin D, working shift work, and an unease that my life was not, I wasn't where I wanted to be and doing things I wanted to be. My innate sense had been to be in a warmer climate, with a closer connection to nature, and as well as nutrition, the idea of having mental balance is just so important. So I don't think it's any surprise that I got sick. It was my dis-ease. And it was an odd thing because so I had this event called a transverse myelitis, which is basically where you get inflammation through the spinal cord. And so I tried to ignore it, but it got to the point where I couldn't actually walk from the car park at the hospital through to the intensive care unit I was working in. So it's quite clear I wasn't capable of doing my job. I had an MRI, and so that showed this big lesion through the cord and a couple of sort of non-specific things in the brain. And so then it was like, well, we're not going to tell you you've got MS because that would be a devastating thing. It will have bigger implications for, your employment. So we'll put this down as a single episode. But things don't look particularly good. And so I sort of, and this is where maybe I feel a bit embarrassed, was there was just a brief comment, because I asked, the neurologist who was a colleague, what is there anything I can do to help myself? And some people think diet might help them, but there's no good evidence for that. Well, that's not a resounding recommendation for you to go off and change your lifestyle, and maybe I should have picked up on it a bit more. And I sort of read some of the information on it, but there's a discrepancy between what I read. So what I read was the Swank study, and we can talk about that. But this was a big study done in the States over 30 years where people who changed their lifestyle had no progression and stabilised the disease. So I read this, but then my whole teaching, none of this stuff had ever come up. And, I'd worked in, just hospitals in London, Manchester and Sydney, and with people who were considered, sort of world experts in their field. And surely if this thing is going to work, this would have been front and centre of the treatment that was being offered, but it wasn't even mentioned. The only option at the time was some medications which were of very limited benefit and with very significant side effects generally. So it leaves you in a position where you're not really engaged in looking after yourself. And so as we now know, but to be fair, the genetic studies were there. So the genetics will give you 20 to 25% of the risk of developing MS, but they say nothing really about how the disease progresses. That's basically due to external factors like vitamin D, diet, stress, smoking if you smoke.
So the predisposition is there, but it's obviously activated by, like you say, lifestyle choices.
Exactly. Yeah, and so there's very clear studies for like over 10,000 people with MS worldwide that the genes do not dictate how this disease progresses. It's all due to external factors. Now, there's some external factors which you can't control, like your exposure to certain viruses, but all the other things like vitamin D, shift work, diet, exercise,
your sleep patterns as well, that would have been a factor. Being on shift
pattern,
work,
absolutely. Yeah. So I don't think it's any surprise that I know so many doctors who developed MS, and we've all worked in the acute specialties. Anaesthetic, emergency. It's staring us in the face.
So now, just for our listeners, just to put a pause on that. For most that are still wondering, what is multiple sclerosis, and is that something that is a progressive? It progressively gets to the point that you become diagnosed with it, or is it a particular, or can it be a short-term sort of phase, like you say, what you live for 3, 4, 5 years as an intern, the shifts, the quality of life, and so on. Can it happen at any stage of your life, or does it start from the beginning and it just progressively graduates to something that is then diagnosed as such?
Okay, yeah, so it's a good question. So I probably should have started off with an introduction. So look, MS is the commonest disabling illness of young adults, and it's considered to be an autoimmune, degenerative and progressive condition that affects the brain and the spinal cord. The main hardware that's driving the nervous system that sends out the actions to control the movements of your body and also how you perceive the world. So what normally happens is that somebody will have an initial episode, what we call a demyelinating episode, where there's some inflammation somewhere in the brain and spinal cord, and that can present with numbness, weakness in a part of the body. In my case, I went numb from the waist down and couldn't walk for a period of time. Another common thing is I lost my eyesight in my right eye. But you have one episode, and that's called a clinically isolated syndrome. But then if you have to have another lesion to be formally diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, because you've now had another episode separate to the original one. But it's very likely that basically there's been some degeneration in the brain in a long time leading up to this. So most people, by the time they present with their initial episode of MS, have clear evidence of impaired cognition. The brain's not working as well if you test it. And then over a period of 30 years, people with MS compared to sort of normal controls, other people lose something like 40% of their nerve cells.
And it can be quite devastating, kind of. I mean, 75% of people diagnosed aren't working within 10 years of their diagnosis. So
and the majority, often like up to 50% of people are out of work after the first episode, the majority are not working within 10 years, and most people go on to a progressive state where they become progressively more disabled and end up requiring high-level nursing care. So an absolutely devastating disease if it's left, if you don't treat it with all the tools that you can do, which is correcting all the risk factors, all the modifiable risk factors like diet, vitamin D, how you react to stress, things like that. And we can go into that into a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the work by Roy Swank back in 1950, I think it was. So, this data's been around for quite a long time, which probably adds to the frustration of you not being made aware of it in your training. So how did you stumble across that initially?
Well, yeah, I was lucky that another doctor who I knew got diagnosed with MS said, "Oh, you got to have a look at this this bit of work. It might be of interest to you." So that got highlighted to me, and then at the time, so we'll have to talk about George Jelinek.
Yes, absolutely.
So the SWANK study. So I just should say a little bit about SWANK. So what we've alluded to is there was a very famous neurologist from the States called Roy Swank, and this man was an eminent neurologist. He taught at Harvard and McGill. He was professor of neurology at Oregon, and back in 1948 he'd done some basic epidemiological work and some animal studies that basically linked high animal fat intake with the development and progression of MS. And areas that had increased unsaturated fat intake, so from oily fish and things, were protected. And his hypothesis was that diet affected the development and progression of MS. And then he set up a massive study, 144 people with MS, and followed them for over 30 years. And for people who made substantial lifestyle change. So it wasn't fully a plant-based diet. He still allowed some skinless chicken breast, but compared to their standard American diet, this was a huge change, and basically showed that regardless of how disabled they were at the beginning of the study, if they were able to keep to the lifestyle changes, their MS stabilized and they had no progression in disability, and the vast majority of those people who made the lifestyle changes survived over the course of a 35-year study. Okay, and the people who weren't able to make the changes were either dead, 78%, I think it was, or severely disabled, basically bedbound. And this research, so this research got published in the Lancet in 1990, and nothing really was done with it until George Jelinek, who is an emergency professor from Australia, came across the work when he was diagnosed with MS. So it doesn't reflect very well on the medical profession that for this untreated condition, there was a huge study showing you could stop its progression, and nobody did anything with it. I mean, it's a tragedy, really.
And is that the same study that made the link between dairy and MS as well? Considering the high saturated fat content?
Yeah, no. So that was largely with the saturated fat content, though I think on Swank's program he did still allow some skim milk. But there was some more data that came out which persuaded George Jelinek who set up the Overcoming MS program, which is the 7-step recovery program. There was more data that came out that just clarified the issue of dairy. So there's long been an epidemiological link with countries that consume large amounts of dairy, they get large amounts of MS. But then there's a lot more other science that's come up to back all of this up. So one study showed that if you wanted to create an animal model of MS, what you do is inject rats with cow's milk proteins and they'd develop an MS-like illness. That was one thing. And then another study in Germany showed that if you got the immune cells from people with MS and you presented them with cow's milk proteins, they'd throw off all the chemicals that you get when you're having a relapse. So when you have that congruence of evidence from multiple sources, that's highly persuasive in medicine. The other issue of that is that these cow's milk proteins, so the way the immune system works is that your immune cells recognize proteins as foreign and go and attack them. And it appears that some of these cow's milk proteins resemble the coating around the nerve cells, the myelin sheath. And so the immune cells will be stimulated by cow's milk proteins to go and attack the myelin sheath. So you've got a very clear mechanism backing up all the epidemiological data.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we've covered with a number of other guests as well, is that in the medical sector, you focus more time studying, I guess, how to safely administer antibiotics and other drugs as opposed to focusing on sort of lifestyle, approach to medicine, including nutrition. which is, something that's being echoed over and over again, and by yourself as well, and you've been part of that journey. So I guess when you say it was surprising that you were getting this conflicting message, well, you went through that system.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you realize, well, have you been best equipped with the right tools?
No, not. And I think, to be fair to people, I think they're trying to change it. So I remember, so I went to Manchester, and I was in the second year. They developed a problem-based learning course, and the idea of that was that you were meant to come to problems fresh and work out the answers for yourself, which, in a way, is what George Jelinek did when. Well, it's exactly what he did when he got the diagnosis of MS. But I remember the first sort of introductory lecture was, the reason we've introduced this course is because if common sense was common, we wouldn't have a problem, and we've got a big problem. So I think there is a recognition that this problem's there. The problem is that I think by the time you get to the end of your training and you start going through your professional exams, it just falls back onto this robotic, well, it might be different in different places, but I mean, I've done postgraduate exams in surgery, general practice, and my physician's exams, and it's just these sort of very traditional rote replies to questions, as opposed to really thinking about what's going on. So much so that I actually went back to finish my physician's exams back in Scotland, and one of my cases was somebody with MS. And so by this time I'd been through the Overcoming MS program, and so what you do in these exams is you get taken around by two specialists, and you go and examine patients, and you say what's wrong with them and what you do with them. So I examined this patient. They've clearly got multiple sclerosis, and the questions like, what would you do? So you throw off all the usual things, or give this drug, that drug. I knew when I did that exam, if I sort of sparked up and said, well, actually, I'm going to put them on a whole food plant-based diet, get them meditating, correct their vitamin D deficiency, I'd have been, failed there, and I wanted to sort of sit the guy down and go, right, this is what you need to do, but you can't. And just, I think before we came on air, we sort of talked a little bit about this, because this now, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just, and I'm sure, this is the reason why you're doing this, is because it's just clear that the only way we're going to manage these modern conditions is to address what actually causes them, and it has to be front and center of what we're doing. And the problem is I guess people get very stuck with their paradigms, their beliefs, without questioning them, and so I think this. And I think it's changing, and we've seen that with how people are changing how they offer these, how people present their medical practice that they're offering. But I'm looking at setting up a new medical centre, and I want to put this front and centre of what we're doing. But I've already been warned by high up professors of medicine and thing, that if you do this, there's a high chance you're going to come under scrutiny from the regulator for offering alternative therapies like diet. I mean, it's so that's a challenge. But I mean, the other. So that sounds a bit negative saying all that, and I think the other thing is that basically the evidence is that we're right, and and we should enjoy that. And every time. Neil Barnard spoke very well about this at the Doctors for Nutrition conference, and he was sort of questioned on this, and he was like, "Look, no, I go and have fun with this. I sued the US government and made them change their nutrition guidelines, and now I'm going around every state in America telling them you've got to offer plant-based nutrition in your schools, hospitals, and prisons, and if you don't, we'll sue you."
It's a bit of a rock star doctor, isn't it?
So and maybe and having an attitude of fun with it is gonna and happiness and that's I guess how things are gonna move forward.
That's right, just like leading positivity and joy. And I mean, it is heartening to see that there is a growing movement for lifestyle medicine within Australia. I'm a fellow of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and like every year you go to the conference, it's bigger, there's more practitioners there from across the board, so that's really good. And I think, mainstream medical practitioners are slowly but surely starting to cotton on that it's not just a bunch of hippies. Like, you still are advocating for appropriate medication as required. It's just that, front and center should be these lifestyle medicine initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, just to so the Roy Swank study that you say was published in the Lancet in 1990. When did Professor George Jelinek do his, study and research and so on? How long did it take to get to that phase?
Yeah, so George was young to become a president of the College of Emergency Medicine, and he edited the Emergency Medical Journal for I think about 15 years, and it was only I think around his time of diagnosis, which I think was around 1998, 1999, when he got sick, that he actually went back through the evidence base and found the paper.
Wow.
And
so it was already 8-9 years old by then.
Yeah. So George writes about this in the book, and one of the issues was at the time in the Lancet there were anonymous editorials. So basically, medicine's the same as any other profession. There's people out gunning for each other and trying to push themselves ahead. And so the sort of great strength of Swank's work, this 30-year study, was also its downfall, because by the time he published in 1990, the burden of proof was that you needed a randomised controlled trial, which was not a reasonable expectation for him, because randomised controlled trials didn't exist when he set the trial up. And then, you could compare it, and George does this in the book, that, the cure for pernicious anemia was the, chopped liver diet for access to B12. And when that got published with the same type of study, it won the Nobel Prize. So Swank had published maybe 10 years earlier.
Wow.
This wouldn't even be debate. Yeah, It's just like just how history works out.
Now I know why my mum used to make us liver growing up for B12. Damn it, she obviously read the research.
Take B12 supplement. You don't need all the other stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh dear.
So let's unpack this diet a little bit and the lifestyle principles. So you mentioned a whole food plant-based diet. Most of our listeners will be familiar with that, but specifically let's talk a little bit about the saturated fat, I suppose, and what we should be limiting that to, what foods are best to be avoided, because I know even within the plant-based realm there's some foods that maybe you shouldn't be having a hell of a lot of. So what's a day on your plate look like?
Okay. So I often start off with a smoothie. So I've got kids, so we sort of mix it up with them a bit. So what did I have this morning? Blueberry, strawberry, banana smoothie with some ground flaxseed.
All the good stuff.
We've made some veggie burgers at home today, which we had in some wholemeal rolls, and I'm afraid to say my wife's cooking tonight. I haven't. It's just basically eating plants and avoiding things like, so avoid coconut oil, avoid palm oil, avoid altered fats. So I guess I've already said we're avoiding saturated fat, so animal fats, anything deep fried, stay clear of that. The altered fats is an issue, so like if you go down the processed food aisle, most products will have some palm oil hidden in there and things, so it's a bit of a thing of getting used to, or just examining the labels and knowing what you can shop, but it's just it's a matter of changing habits of the foodstuffs that you buy.
Yeah. So part of the recovery, now you reading your sort of bio, you were diagnosed in 2008, but it's not that you got it in 2008, it was just pretty much critical by then. But your recovery was relatively quick. I mean, in my mind, So basically I sort of, throughout 2008, I just got sicker and sicker. I had a number of relapses and, basically told I could take retirement for ill health at the age of 32, and so then I'd sort of really hit rock bottom. I'd hit a low patch anyway, and so then George was running programs with Ian Gawler in the Yarra Valley at the Gawler Foundation,
And really, at that stage, medicine didn't really have anything more to offer me. I was on, a partially effective medication, but it was really, well, we'll just see you next time you get sick and bring you in and give you more medications. So I flew out January 2009 and went to one of these programs. And there's a few things to say about it. I think one of the most useful things there was being reintroduced actually to the practice of meditation. Because I think, like we all do, I'd got very sort of caught up in the, demands of, or my perceived demands of life, and the actual very basics of what I needed to address about my own health, my own spirituality, and the basics of being able to actually look after myself had to be sort of relearned, and I had to make space for that. And so when you're faced with a major illness, you don't need your attention on other issues in your life, any unresolved issues. You've got to start paying attention to how you actually live and put yourself first, I guess. So that was one thing, to be introduced to that. But I have to say, one of the things that struck me was just seeing George Jelinek. So I just took one look at him and thought, you look well. You can see it. You see the vigor in someone's eyes and their tone, the way they carry themselves, the energy within them. And I was just sort of struck by the minute I saw him that this man is well and he's been through it. And it did help that he was a professor of emergency medicine who could articulate the science very clearly and explain very clearly why he'd reached the conclusion that following a plant-based diet was the key to recovery. So it's just there. Someone was giving you a way out of a very difficult situation. So I felt inspired. I could see that it had been done, and it made sense to me. And so the mind doesn't want to feel crazy. The mind wants to be at peace. And so I was now clear that I believed in the science behind the recovery that George had already experienced, and that I could apply that to myself and how I lived. I mustn't underestimate the importance of support for this around people who care about you. So that's one of the big things, isn't it? About how people recover, the feeling of connectedness and relatedness, that you're surrounded by people who understand what they do and who care for you. And I have to say that's been one of the most sort of rewarding and sort of pleasing things, really. I remember before I flew out, I'd gone out for dinner with some friends. We've been at someone's house for a dinner party, actually, and it was all doctors, and they said, we're concerned you're being given false hope by going to this program. And okay, well, I'll go there and we'll meet again and we'll speak. And so some things came out of that, because these were close friends of mine from medical school who are now specialists in hospitals throughout the UK, and they speak to patients and they speak to their colleagues, and they know exactly what's happened to me, and they know the lessons around nutrition and lifestyle that I went through, and they've now brought to their lives and to their working practices. So interestingly, I guess many of the people who know what I've been through, they've all adopted plant-based diets. It just makes sense now. Anyone who actually reads it. It reminds me of that. There's Tim Williams, the previous president of the College of Cardiology, is on this, isn't he? He says, there's two types of cardiologists, vegans and those who haven't read the evidence. And so this, once I think people, particularly people, I guess, who are of a sort of scientific or evidence-based mindset, once you start actually reading the data behind all this, I mean, it's not even up for discussion, and the benefits of this has flowed through to everyone. So MS is really common in the UK, and so some of these friends of mine, they had relatives who adopted the program, and they also recovered. And so those stories then sort of progress and they progress out. And so coming back to your original thing about the recovery, so the first thing was to be given hope. And because if you're not, and particularly MS and I contest any modern Western condition, and these will all respond to lifestyle change, and to be told otherwise is to be given false no hope. You can get better from it. And but to go from a mindset of like, you're completely powerless and you're just going to have to sit around waiting to see what happens is just wrong and disempowering and dispiriting. And so to come away utterly convinced that you can be well just totally changes how you feel. And so I came away energized spiritually and also physically. But as soon as you start changing that way of eating, and I know I'm speaking to the converted here, but you just feel it straight away. Your energy levels go up. And so I got back to work. So I'd previously qualified as a GP. I got back to work 2 days a week. I started exercising again. And then it becomes this virtuous sort of cycle. Like the more you do, the better you feel. So the more you're able to do. And I remember sort of 4 or 5 months into it, my wife's from Holland. We went over there, and in the town there was a half marathon, and I was like, I hadn't really trained for it, but I'll go and do it. And I just ran the fastest half marathon time I'd ever done. And I sped around this course. I was like, I'm really well. I can do this now. And so you can just feel it. And then once you start feeling it, and it just grows, you just want to continue doing it. Yeah. And then people see it, and people say, what did you do, or what happened? And they start looking at it. And I mean, I've seen it, in my family. My sure my dad won't mind me saying this. He used to be quite forgetful. Like, we were sort of a bit concerned that his memory was, deteriorating.
Yeah.
And they and again, this connected thingness, so they saw what happened. They were embracing it, but they're in the best shape of their lives. Now they're late 70s, and yet they're really active. They feel really well, and they're not burdened with the usual Western conditions that most people of that age seem to be. That that I see with their friendship, their friend group. So yeah, it took maybe a couple of years for the energy levels to go back.
Yeah,
it's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable how quickly that recovery was. Considering how long you had been suffering such a degenerative sort of sort of condition. But when you talk about there's the 7-step recovery program that incorporated connectedness, lifestyle, nutrition, mental balance, etc. There's a lot of similarity to the blue zone areas, and that have been studied in terms of what makes those people live so much more longer, fulfilling lives. And again, it's not pinpointed down to one component. I mean, we do go on a lot about what their diet is, but there's all the other components that contribute to it as well, in terms of the balance, the overall balance.
I was just thinking that, Ben. I was going to ask Sam, are you planning to turn Ballina into a blue zone?
People are interested. People are interested. Okay. I think even people who, because you can't sort of force it on people, can you? But I think my experience is that you just sort of present these things that have happened, or this information, and just, there's this thing, you could look at this. So, the other week, it's really nice. I had a couple of really interested medical students in with me, and we had, a man in who'd recently just had a heart attack and a couple of stents put in. And so, we sort of prescribed the usual medicines, did the, sort of usual checkup, and then just brought up the idea that, this is reversible. Has anyone spoken to you about this? Does this interest you? Yes, it does. And I think if you just allow people that opportunity for these things, they're very keen to look at it. It's I guess it's how you present it, isn't it? I mean, I'd be interested to know how you see that, because I mean, I can imagine a bit like my experience with the neurologist saying, well, there's this diet. Some people thinks it helps them, but there's not good evidence for it. That's a very different proposition to going, you can reverse all of this and be completely well. Go and see this person, and they'll tell you, how you can help yourself, how you feed yourself. I mean, Emma, how do you see that?
Yeah. And like I work in cattle country, so it's always a bit of a challenge to actually bring this up with my clients. But it's a mixed bag. Sometimes you'll get a lot of resistance, and it is how you phrase it. But all you can do really is plant that seed, whether they take it on board at that point in time or not. Plant the seed, and then something else will come along that may water it. I've been really surprised who actually takes this on board and who doesn't. And oftentimes, I'll bring it up with someone, and then a year later they'll come back to me, and I thought I wouldn't have had any chance in hell of getting them to eat even a legume, let alone go plant-based. And they're on that journey, and they're feeling better, and they've got more energy, and they've told all their friends about it, so they're getting interested as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a challenge sometimes, but you have to let them know that there is this possibility. Otherwise, in my mind, you're not being evidence-based with them if you're not having that conversation with them.
I think you mentioned earlier is that unfortunately it takes to be at an extreme level for you to finally be open to trying new approaches, doesn't it? I mean, you were in 2008, 2009 when you went on this program. But what if that information was presented to you, or this opportunity was presented to you in, say, 5 years prior? You weren't at the worst state, but hey, you're heading that way. What you're eating, what you're consuming, your lifestyle is not conducive to good health in the long term. Change it now. Would you have been open to that? That's.
I think it depends how people phrase it, and how it's presented to people, isn't it? Where they see their risk and what their concerns are. So I do. Okay, I'd be really interested to know how you guys do this, because I'm sure you do it much more effectively. Because I'll sort of maybe look at someone's waist circumference or something and say, well, this is you're at high risk of all these issues now, or ask them if they've got any health concerns. And try and sort of just open that conversation up. I think if people perceive the risk as real, and they have an understanding of the seriousness of what they may be up against, then it would trigger change. But I think often we sort of downplay that, or and there's a lot of influences that come into play with that, aren't there?
I just find people tend to be more reactive than proactive, and I think that's just a general thing in life. If you're going to tell someone, you're going to look at their home and say, look, your gutters are not attached in the best way. I think let's replace those screws so that when a big storm happens, they'll stay securely. No, I'll wait till, people are not going to be proactive about things, including their health. Why? I feel fine. I'm okay. What's wrong with me? You're saying what I'm doing is not good for long term, but I am fine until a heart attack is suffered, or until there's a stroke, or until there's loss of memory, or until there's diagnosed with diabetes. Whatever the case is. So yeah, you're right. It's how do you get on the front foot?
I think, how you present that. I again, at that Doctors for Nutrition conference, I really enjoyed. They put a slide up of somebody said discussing the risks of plant-based diet for pregnancy. It was actually, well, what are the risks of with the diet you're following in your pregnancy?
Exactly.
And sort of presenting the information differently. But that means that the health professionals people are in contact with, and as a society, how honest we are about the risks of what we do. And as we all know, there's a lot of money and influences that are brought to bear to sort of cloud that message, unfortunately.
That's what it comes down to. Politics and economics.
Yeah. But I think I guess the internet's not been great in lots of ways, but one of the things that has been great is that this information now just gets so widely circulated that it's out there, and generally the truth sticks and the other stuff falls away.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that's got to be the thing that we sort of hold on to, that, you know, just like Neil Barnard says, you know, the facts around this and this are just too strong for it to just disappear. It's not. It's going to just keep, you know, finding its way there and finding its way into the consciousness of people, and how we how we bring that into our lives. So I feel really optimistic about how things are going to be with it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's already been that change. I mean, compared to 2008, the information that was available, like readily available, compared to now, it's just, you know, like day and night.
And the amount of studies that are coming out as well and more readily available.
Yeah.
So we've touched on diet, we've touched on, you know, the importance of exercise, stress management, your vitamin D. Have we talked about omega-3 yet? Should we talk about that?
Yeah, we can do. Yeah.
Just very quickly before we move on from this. So why is omega-3 so important for people with MS?
Yeah, so we said that MS was an autoimmune and an inflammatory condition, and so we'd hope that, and so there's fats which will drive inflammation, so like omega-6 fats and trans fats and saturated fats, and omega-3s will dampen down that inflammation. And so the ratio of, you know, omega-6 to omega-3 is 2 to 1. We should be hoping for 1 to 1 even, but in most Western countries we're up at sort of at least 25, even 50 to 1. So we're in this very inflammatory state, and we're trying to change that balance. And so one thing we can do is to reduce the amount of inflammatory fats in our diet, but the other thing we can do is increase the amount of anti-inflammatory fats that we have in our diet. So omega-3s will do that. So they're anti-inflammatory, they're resistant to degeneration, and that's their physical properties. You know, these things are liquid at room temperature, they're pliable, and they're meant to work in the human body. You know, whereas you look at the trans fats that keep the food solid on the shelves for 50 years, you know, it's not a good idea to be putting that in your body.
Yeah.
So hence the inclusion of ground flaxseed in your smoothie to get some good omega-3s, and conversely the exclusion of the processed all oils are processed really, but the oils is what boosts that ratio of that omega-6 and makes it incredibly out of balance and increases the inflammatory responses of the body. Now, Sam, you mentioned to me a little earlier, I think it was in an email, that you recently completed a master's in sports medicine. Tell us a little bit about that. Is that going back to that half marathon you ran and thought, hang on?
That and kickboxing, and so I like my soccer and I like my kickboxing, and so when I was younger I used to do quite a bit of kickboxing, and
that sounds like good stress management.
It is, and that got quite interesting. So I thought so there are a few things with the sports medicine. I was involved in a few sort of professional soccer clubs, and then it all just sort of started to tie in, because then I got to choose what my sort of project would be on, and so I looked at nutritional interventions for elite athletes, and you know, it's the same stuff. It's game changers, isn't it? It's the same stuff that comes up again and again, you know, and that's a sort of really empowering thing, you know, because obviously, you know, when they do the studies on these food stuff, and they really start sort of breaking it down, which, you know, it's not always completely helpful to have a reductionist approach to it, but you know, it is interesting. So like the big example is like with beetroot juicing, isn't it? Well, it is if you follow soccer. And so when Leicester City won the league, the English Premier League, and they were 5,000 to 1 outsiders, and they had all their players on beetroot juice, and it was making them run faster, and
because of the nitrate content.
And then they'd have like quicker reaction times after sort of 90 minutes of high intensity activity. And so it's really interesting just to really start looking at the benefits of plant-based diet for athletes. And so I've got a good friend who's a professional K1 kickboxer, and again, just having the discussion around then, if you sort of talk about, well, you know, there's going to be better oxygen delivery, better recovery after training and after competition, you know, people do is prick up. They want to they want to know what they can do to sort of be ahead of everyone else. And so it was a nice sort of way to just introduce this to every area of my practice, really. And again, you bring this around when you sort of have discussions around people saying, well, they're healthy. Well, I didn't know this. Did you know? So like athletes are more prone to like heart disease, and so then obviously then you bring up the fact that, well, if you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you can reverse all of these issues, and it's just been just a nice thing that ties in together, and the fact that this is just what's good for the human body in different states is the same. We're not asking people to sort of do one thing for one set of circumstances. It's like, no, these are the actions around good nutrition, meditation will benefit us all, and I guess that's been known to some people for a long time, but for a doctor like me, I had to relearn all this stuff again.
Yeah.
No, it's all about longevity, and especially in sport, the approach I take with a lot of people is that, well, you've got all these goals, you want to run marathons, play sports games, matches, whatever, but why stop in 5 years when you can't anymore? Why not give yourself longevity into that hobby? Because for most people, we're not professional athletes, it's part of your lifestyle. So it's about longevity. It's about reducing the risks of mortality. That's the extreme, obviously, but injuries and so on, but improving recovery, improving your health, improving your ability to move and function.
And being able to enjoy it for longer too.
Absolutely. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key with plant-based or whole food plant-based approach to sport. It's not just about the short-term goals. It's actually more about the long-term goals. And I think that's where there's a lot of benefit for the more general public partaking in an active lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, I should say that. I mean, the other thing that I found really interesting, just as I was studying more of the exercise stuff, was just I guess I probably hadn't appreciated how exercise transforms your body, and that's inherent to you in your experience. But so, for example, like in MS, so everyone's generally the paradigm is that as you get older, your brain shrinks and there's degeneration, and in MS that happens about 5 times faster than everybody else. So then they did this neat little study where they got people doing resistance training just twice a week, and their brains started getting bigger. So completely clear evidence that you can regenerate your brain simply through exercise. And they're saying that, so resistance training for increasing the size of the brain, and then aerobic training for increasing the size of the hippocampus. So, it's involved in your memory. So this sort of just throws it out there that you've got this ability to regenerate your body if you're and given the right instructions. You can manipulate things so that you can not just stabilize things, but you can be new. You can create a new body. I mean, that's a really important step that I think you have to across to people. And I think this is well understood by really sort of leaders in the field, isn't it? I mean, that's why we've now got Dean Ornish starting a study to show that you can reverse early stage Alzheimer's. He's not doing that study because he thinks he's going to get a negative result.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at his studies previously, even with the prostate cancer, these things, lifestyle medicine, it matters. It really matters. So it should be talked about a hell of a lot more in consults.
Yeah. And so I think, and I spoke about this, and I guess that's sort of where I hope I'll take things. There's a chef local to me, you might have heard of him, Adam Guthrie.
Yes,
He had his heart attack in his 30s, and now he's an Ironman athlete, and he's fantastic at getting the message out there. And I've been to see him speak at one of the events that he puts on. And the conversation we had was, we'd love to be able to create the medical centre that we wish had existed when we got sick, so that when you come in, you have doctors who really understand the importance of lifestyle and nutrition, that you have, psychologists there who can help you, deal with whatever issues you have, so that the focus can be on being well and living well in all ways. And that you'd have access to, knowledgeable dietitians, knowledgeable exercise physiologists, because all of this knowledge is out there now. This isn't, like you said, it's not that this stuff isn't known, but I think it's about making it accessible so that people become empowered and they're able to take control of the issues themselves. People do want that power.
Yeah.
They just need to, and I think again, it comes a bit back, like the comment from my neurologist, like if you phrase something in a way that, it might, there's no evidence that this will help, to actually you can completely transform your body and your life and be completely well and have a completely different future than the one you're fearing. People respond to that message, and I think that's what we have to get out there. Yeah.
That's such a positive message of hope to kind of wrap this all up on, I think. But absolutely. I just wanted to, before we finish off, I know that it was planned to have an Overcoming MS retreat at the Gawler Institute later on in the year, but with all this COVID craziness, is that still going ahead? Can people still come and see you there, or what's the go there?
Good question. I'm not sure is the answer. I've just emailed Barry, the CEO there. So the numbers are dropping in Melbourne, but as yet I haven't received a reply back. So sorry I can't be there.
That's okay, no worries. Where can people reach you? Where's the best way to check in and see?
So either if they're in Ballina, I'm working at the clinic in East Ballina, and the MS information either through the overcomingms.org website or the Gawler Foundation would be the places to go.
And you've got a personal website as well, which I really love, that little canoe shot
it's great,
into the sunset, sunrise. I don't know which direction you're heading.
So I'm going to get that built up, and I'm hoping that will become a good resource for people. Yeah.
Sam, it's been an absolute delight having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your personal journey. And it's been really enlightening. And again, just once again, reinforcing the importance of lifestyle in general. So nutrition, absolutely a massive role, but just through your own personal experience, it goes to show that there's a whole lot of other elements that goes into good exposure to sunshine, exercise, connectedness, sleep, all that kind of stuff. So it's been a really important message that you've shared, and the remarkable recovery is testament to that, and really exciting with what you have planned for, or not necessarily planned, but looking to do in the future. So, we certainly hope to keep in touch. I know we will. And again, thank you so much for sharing the story and coming onto the show.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for doing this. It's fantastic.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.